The coffee cup in Nadia's hand went still the moment she heard her husband speak French. Not the polite, careful French he used with her sometimes. The kind where he slowed down and over-enunciated, treating her like a child learning the alphabet. This was something else entirely. Fast, fluid, intimate. The kind of French people use when they believe no one who matters is listening. They were sitting in the private dining room of Maison Laurier, the kind of restaurant in downtown Ottawa, where the wine list was longer than most novels, and the lighting made everyone look like they had no problems. The dinner had been Marcus's idea. He wanted to impress Etienne Beaumont, a real estate developer from Montreal, whose signature on a joint venture agreement would mean a $40 million project moving forward. Nadia had been invited along as set dressing. She understood this. She had understood it for years. Elle est charmante, bien sûr, Marcus said to Etienne, gesturing toward her with a tilt of his champagne glass. Mais entre nous, elle ne comprend pas grand-chose aux affaires. Je la laisse jouer à ses petits projets. She is charming, of course. But between us, she doesn't understand much about business. I let her play with her little projects. Nadia set her coffee cup down with the care of someone diffusing something. Her face did not change. She had grown up speaking French. Her mother's language, her grandmother's language, the language of her childhood in the Gatineau Hills. But Marcus had never thought to ask. In 4 years of marriage, he had apparently never wondered why she smiled so easily in Quebec. Why she always navigated menus without him. Why she had studied French literature alongside her commerce degree at the University of Ottawa. He had never asked because he had never thought there was anything to ask. To Marcus, she was a beautiful woman he had married at 32 when she was 28. A woman who looked good at dinners like this one and asked few inconvenient questions. Et votre entreprise, Etienne said carefully, est-ce qu'elle est impliquée dans les décisions? Is she involved in the decisions? Marcus laughed, a short, dismissive sound. Non non. Elle s'occupe de son association caritative. Elle est très, comment dire, décorative. She keeps herself busy with her charity. She is very, how to say, decorative. Nadia reached for her water glass. She took a slow sip. Across the table, Etienne Beaumont's expression had shifted almost imperceptibly. A slight tightening around the eyes, the way a man of manners registers something he finds distasteful but will not say aloud. He glanced at Nadia for just a moment and she held his gaze with a neutral, pleasant smile. Then she looked away. The dinner continued. There was lamb with a rosemary reduction, and conversation about projected square footage and zoning regulations, and Marcus's easy, expansive laugh that he deployed like a tool. Nadia ate. She listened to everything. She heard Marcus describe how his last 2 projects had come in over budget, but the way he framed it to Etienne softened the numbers considerably. She heard him mention a silent partner she had never heard of. She heard him once lower his voice and say in French that the environmental assessments on this new site had been handled in a way that would not slow things down. Etienne had nodded without quite smiling. By the time the dessert plates were cleared, Nadia had memorized everything. Marcus reached over and touched her hand as they stood to leave. The gesture was automatic, performed for an audience. I think that went well, he said quietly in English. It seemed to, Nadia said. In the car on the way home he was already on his phone. She looked out the window at the Ottawa River, black and still in the February dark, and she thought about a prenuptial agreement she had signed 4 years ago without reading every line. She thought about her father, who had been a notary before he retired and who had warned her gently, over tea, that she should have a lawyer look at the document. She had waved him off. She had been in love. She thought now about whether she had read the clause on page 11. The next morning Marcus left early. He always left early. Nadia waited until she heard his car back out of the driveway. Then she went to the filing cabinet in the home office where they kept their documents. She had always been the one who managed the household files. Marcus found administrative tasks tedious. He preferred to delegate. She found the prenuptial agreement and sat down at the kitchen table with it and her coffee. She read every page. Page 11. In the event of proven marital infidelity on the part of either spouse, this agreement shall be rendered null and void, and the division of assets shall proceed according to the applicable provisions of the Family Law Act of Ontario. Her coffee went cold while she read it twice more. Then she thought about something Marcus had said 6 months ago, casual and offhand, when he thought she was reading and not paying attention. He'd been on the phone with someone pacing near the window. He'd said a name, Clementine, with a particular softness in his voice that she had registered at the time and filed away without quite acknowledging what it meant. Clementine Voss. She was a project manager who worked with Marcus's development firm. Nadia had met her twice at company events, sharp, polished, the kind of woman who asked precise questions during presentations. She drove a new car every year. She wore a watch that cost more than Nadia's monthly charitable foundation budget. Nadia went upstairs, changed into her running clothes, and drove to her friend Ren's apartment on Elgin Street. Ren Barrett had been her closest friend since their first year at university. She was now a family law lawyer at a mid-sized firm on Sparks Street, and she had the particular quality of people who are very good at their work. She became completely still when she was thinking. Nadia told her everything: the dinner, the French, Marcus's words, the clause in the prenup. And Ren sat at her kitchen island with both hands wrapped around a mug and did not interrupt once. When Nadia finished, Ren was quiet for a moment. "The clause is real," she said. "I've seen that language before. It's not ironclad, but it's workable. Do you have any evidence of the infidelity?" "Not yet." "Okay." Ren set her mug down. "Then that's what we build." Carefully, quietly, and without tipping him off. "Can you access his phone or email? He gave me his passwords 2 years ago. Something about being transparent in marriage." Nadia's voice was level. "He never changed them." Ren almost smiled. He really did not think this through. That evening, while Marcus attended what he described as a planning meeting downtown, Nadia sat at the kitchen table with her laptop. She accessed his personal email through the shared cloud account she had never mentioned knowing the password to. She found what she needed within 15 minutes. Emails to Clementine that had nothing to do with zoning applications or construction timelines. Messages that were brief and careful. He had some instinct for caution, but unmistakable in their meaning. References to a hotel on the canal. A reservation confirmation under his name for last October, a weekend he had told Nadia he spent in Toronto at a conference. She had driven him to the airport herself. She took screenshots of everything. She created a new email address on her phone and forwarded them to herself, then deleted the forwarding activity from the account. Then she sat back and looked at the kitchen she had designed herself, the open shelving, the soapstone counters, the herbs growing in clay pots on the windowsill, and felt something complicated move through her. She called Ren. "I have it," she said. "How much?" "Enough." There was a pause. "Nadia, are you sure you want to do this?" She thought about Marcus at the dinner table, gesturing toward her with his champagne glass. Decorative. She thought about 4 years of managing his social calendar, hosting his clients, learning the names of their children and their preferred wine. She thought about the small consulting business she had quietly built on the side, helping nonprofits with governance and financial strategy. Work that Marcus described to people as her, keeping herself occupied. "Yes," she said. "I'm sure." Ren connected her the next day with a colleague named Rosalind Kwok, a senior family law partner, with a reputation for methodical and absolute thoroughness. Rosalind's office was on the 14th floor of a building on Queen Street, and she had the manner of someone who had heard every version of every story, and was no longer surprised by any of them. She reviewed the screenshots Nadia brought and asked precise questions about the timeline of the marriage, the financial structure of Marcus's company, and the nature of Nadia's initial contributions to their joint finances. "You mentioned putting money in early," Rosalind said. "Tell me about that." "When Marcus launched the development firm 5 years ago. Before we were married, I lent him $60,000. It was my savings. He was short on working capital and the bank wouldn't move quickly enough. He paid some of it back, about $20,000, but the rest was folded into the company's early operations." Nadia paused. "I have the wire transfer records." Rosalind looked at her for a moment. "And were you listed anywhere in the company formation documents?" "I need to check. He handled all of that. Find out." Rosalind made a note. "If there's any documentation of your investment predating the marriage and the prenup, it changes the picture considerably." Nadia left the office with a list of documents to gather, and a clearer sense of what the next several months would require. She would not confront Marcus yet. She would not change her behavior. She would continue to attend his dinners, to smile at his colleagues, to be exactly what he believed her to be. And while she did that, she would build the case. She went home and called her father in Gatineau. "Papa," she said, "do you still have the copies you made of the documents before our wedding, the financial ones?" There was a brief pause. "I made copies of everything," he said carefully. "I kept them. I thought you might need them someday. Can I come this weekend?" "I'll make tourtière," he said. Over the following weeks, Nadia moved through her life with a precision she had not used in years. At Marcus' clients' dinners, she smiled and listened and remembered everything. At her own office, a converted spare bedroom where she ran her consulting practice, she worked longer hours, building her client list, taking on 2 new contracts with community foundations in the Ottawa Valley. She was good at this work. She had always been good at it. Marcus had simply never looked closely enough to notice. She also started moving money. Rosalind had advised her carefully on what was permissible. She had full access to their joint personal accounts, and could draw from them without restriction. She opened an account in her name alone at a different bank and transferred funds slowly, categorizing them as professional expenses and charitable donations. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would catch the eye of a man who reviewed the household statements about as often as he watered the houseplants. She also kept alive herself. She transferred $40,000 over 6 weeks. Marcus didn't mention it. One evening in late March, she found something that hadn't been on her original list. Marcus had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter. He did this when he was in a hurry, and she glanced at the screen while she was setting out the takeout containers he'd asked her to order. She saw an email thread with his CFO, someone named Bertrand, about the environmental assessment on the new development site. She read quickly. The language was careful, full of euphemism, but the meaning was clear enough. The assessment had been submitted with figures that were, in Bertrand's own word, optimized, to avoid triggering a provincial review. The site was on land near a protected wetland. The real numbers had been adjusted before filing. She took a photo with her phone before Marcus came back into the room. She forwarded it to Rosalind the next morning with a single question. Is this useful? Rosalind called her within the hour. Her voice had a new quality in it. Not excitement exactly, but focus. This is significant, not necessarily for the divorce itself but as leverage. If he decides to fight the prenup termination or dispute the division of assets, we can make clear that we are aware of some additional matters that may be of interest to the Ministry of the Environment. We don't have to threaten. We just have to let him understand what we know. Is that ethical? We're not asking for anything that isn't already yours by law. We're simply ensuring he doesn't create unnecessary obstacles. Rosalind paused. You'd be surprised how quickly difficult men become reasonable when they realize the cost of being unreasonable. Spring came slowly to Ottawa, the way it always did. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, ice returning in April just to remind everyone who was really in charge. Nadia attended a charity gala at the Chateau Laurier in early May. Marcus was across the room for most of the evening, working the room with the easy confidence of a man who believed his position was unassailable. Clementine was there too in a capacity that was technically professional. Nadia watched her for a while without seeming to. She saw the way Clementine's hand brushed Marcus's arm when she leaned in to say something. She saw Marcus tilt his head toward her with a particular attentiveness he had not used on Nadia in at least 2 years. She felt nothing, and she found the absence of feeling clarifying. At one point during the evening, Etienne Beaumont materialized beside her near the bar, 2 glasses of sparkling water in hand. He offered her one. Madame aussi, he said in French. I hope you'll forgive a small observation. Of course, she replied, also in French. She watched his face register this with a flicker of something, reassessment perhaps. At dinner in February, he said carefully, I found some of your husband's remarks about treatable. I have been in business for 30 years and in my experience, men who speak that way about their wives are revealing something about themselves, not about their wives. Nadia studied him for a moment. That's a generous observation. It is an honest one. I also want you to know that I have decided not to move forward with the joint venture. There were several reasons, but among them was a matter of character. He paused. I hope things go well for you. He moved away before she could say anything more. She stood there for a moment with her sparkling water, thinking about how Marcus would take that news. The Beaumont deal had been the centerpiece of his spring. Without it, the financing on 2 other projects became more complicated. She went back to her table and smiled pleasantly for the rest of the evening. The confrontation happened in June, at another restaurant. Smaller this time, a French bistro on Preston Street where Marcus had taken her for their first anniversary. She still didn't know if he'd chosen it on purpose, or if he'd simply forgotten. Either seemed possible. They were halfway through dinner when Marcus said, with the particular tone of someone raising a topic they've been avoiding, I've been thinking we should talk about the future. The business direction. There might be some changes coming. Nadia looked at him. What kind of changes? The Beaumont deal fell through. I'm restructuring some of the financing. Things might be a bit lean for a while. He said it lightly. The way he said most things he didn't want her to examine too closely. I may need you to cut back on some of your personal spending for a few months. She put down her fork. Marcus, she said, I know about Clementine. The table went quiet the way rooms go quiet when something structural shifts. Marcus's face moved through several arrangements before settling on something composed. What do you mean? I mean I know about the hotel on the canal last October. I mean I know about the emails. I mean I know you've been seeing her for at least 18 months. She kept her voice even. There was nothing satisfying about saying it, and everything necessary. I also know that the environmental filing on the Riverside site was altered before submission, and I know about the $60,000 I put into your company before we were married, which means I have a legitimate claim to a share of it regardless of what the prenup says, especially since the prenup is now void. The composure left his face then. What replaced it was something she had not seen often in Marcus. Genuine uncertainty. Nadia, Listen, whatever you think you know, I know exactly what I know. I've spent 4 months documenting it. She reached into her bag and set a slim folder on the table between them. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. My lawyer will be in touch with yours next week. I wanted to tell you in person because I think you deserve that even if the courtesy wasn't mutual. He stared at the folder. You can't be serious. The prenup is void. Infidelity clause, page 11. She picked up her water glass. You might want to read your own documents more carefully, Nadia. His voice had changed now. Something was cracking underneath it. We can fix this. I made mistakes. I know I have. But we built something together. You can't just. You told Etienne Beaumont I was decorative. She said it quietly without heat. You've been saying versions of that for 4 years. To clients, to colleagues, in private. You stopped seeing me a long time ago, Marcus. You just forgot that I was still seeing you. She put her napkin on the table, gathered her coat from the back of her chair and stood up. He reached for her arm. Please, let's not do this here. Come home and we'll talk about it properly. Rosalind Kwok will be filing the paperwork on Monday morning. You should call your lawyer this weekend. She looked at him for a moment. He looked, for the first time she could remember, small. I'm sorry it ended this way. I was in love with you, for what it's worth. I genuinely was. She walked out of the bistro into the warm June evening. The street smelled of rain that had just passed and something flowering she couldn't name. She had a bag packed in the back of her car, enough for a week at her father's house in Gatineau. She had thought about staying somewhere anonymous, a hotel, but she wanted the Gatineau hills and her father's kitchen and the particular quiet of that house in the early morning. She had earned something familiar. Her phone started ringing before she reached the car. She looked at the screen, turned it face down on the passenger seat, and drove north out of the city. The legal process was, as Rosalind had predicted, not simple. Marcus hired an aggressive firm that challenged the interpretation of the infidelity clause and attempted to argue that Nadia's $60,000 contribution had been a personal gift, not an investment. They hired their own financial expert to undervalue the company. They made a series of procedural motions that seemed designed primarily to exhaust and delay. Rosalind was not exhausted. She submitted the documentation of Nadia's wire transfer, alongside early company emails in which Marcus had himself described her contribution as founder capital. She entered into evidence the hotel reservation, the email correspondence, and a set of phone records. She had also quietly passed the environmental filing information to a contact at a provincial regulatory body, not as a threat, but because the information once known to her as an officer of the court could not ethically be withheld. The investigation that followed became a separate but complicating factor in the proceedings, one that made Marcus's legal team considerably less combative as the weeks went on. In September, 4 months after the dinner on Preston Street, the settlement was reached. Nadia received 30% of the assessed value of Marcus's development firm. The assessment conducted by a neutral third party at the court's direction, which came to just over $2 million. She received half of their joint personal assets, the equity in the house and sole ownership of the consulting practice she had built during the marriage. Marcus retained the business and its ongoing liabilities, including the regulatory investigation, which would cost him considerably more than he had anticipated. The family home sold in October. Nadia moved into a rented apartment on the Glebe while she figured out what came next. It was the top floor of a Victorian semi-detached, with tall ceilings and windows that faced east. She woke up every morning to light. She found this unexpectedly important. She expanded the consulting practice. She had space now. Mental space, physical space, the particular freedom of a schedule that answered only to her. She took on more clients, hired an associate, and began developing a training program for nonprofit board members on financial governance. It was good work. It was hers in a way that nothing had been fully hers for 4 years. Her father drove in from Gatineau once a month and they had dinner and walked along the canal. He did not say he had told her so. He was not that kind of man. Ren was promoted to partner at her firm that November. They celebrated at a small restaurant on Bank Street with a bottle of wine that cost more than either of them would have spent 2 years earlier and felt entirely reasonable now. Have you heard anything about Marcus? Ren asked over dessert. His firm is smaller. The regulatory fine was significant. Nadia turned her wine glass by the stem. Clementine left the company in August. Apparently they separated around the same time. You don't look devastated by that information. I'm not devastated by any of it. I don't feel much about him anymore. She paused. Is that strange? It's probably what moving on actually feels like, Ren said. We just don't see it depicted that way often. In January, Nadia received an email from Etienne Beaumont's assistant. Etienne was advising a consortium of Quebec developers on a project in the National Capital Region and had been looking for a governance and community engagement consultant with experience in both Anglophone and Francophone organizational cultures. He had, the email noted, come across her firm's profile and wondered if she would be interested in a conversation. She wrote back the same day. The contract that came out of that conversation was the largest her firm had taken on. It required her to spend time in both Ottawa and Montreal, and it introduced her to a network of developers, community advocates, and city planners who began to refer other work her way. By the end of the year, she had a team of 4 and a client list that she had not imagined possible when she was rearranging her husband's schedule and keeping his houseplants alive. At a conference in the spring, she was asked to speak on a panel about ethical governance in real estate development. She sat on the stage in front of 300 people and talked about what accountability looked like in practice. Not in the abstract, not in policy language, but in the actual daily choices of people who held power over other people's communities. She talked about what she had learned from working with organizations that had failed, and organizations that had not, and about the particular value of having someone in the room whose job it was to ask the inconvenient questions. Afterward, a young woman came up to her. She was perhaps 25, the kind of composed and watchful person who reminds you of someone you used to be. "Can I ask you something?" the woman said. "You talked about working in environments where people underestimate you. How do you handle that?" Nadia thought about a table at Maison Laurier, a champagne glass, a word in French. "Carefully," she said. "You take very careful notes, and you wait until the moment is right, and then you show them exactly what you know." The young woman wrote that down. On the 2-year anniversary of that dinner, the cold February evening when she had sat across from her husband, while he described her to another man in a language he was certain she did not understand, Nadia was in her east-facing apartment. It was a Saturday morning. She had coffee and the papers and the kind of quiet that she had learned in the past 2 years to stop filling with noise. She thought about the woman who had sat at that table keeping her face blank, her hands steady, saying nothing. She had not been passive. She had been patient. There was a difference, and it had taken her a while to understand it. Passivity fades into the background. Patience watches and waits and builds. She had built something real. Something that would still be there tomorrow regardless of who was sitting across from her. Regardless of what anyone chose to say in a language they believed she didn't speak. She topped up her coffee and opened her laptop. There was work to do, and she was very good at it. And the morning was still young.